Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to your 300,000 Zoom call of 2020. Excited to be here alongside some really excellent esteemed panelists. So today we're talking about a shift that's taking place within the world of sports. It's a shift of power and influence and away from leagues and entrenched media companies and towards the players themselves. There are a lot of ways that the pandemic has reshaped sports and culture and society this year, and a lot of that we won't be able to cover in this 30 minutes, but this is a really interesting topic that is definitely something that we'll look back on 2020 as a huge part of this year, and I think it'll continue moving forward. So before I go on, I wanted to just introduce our panelists, who thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and thank you to the Clios for having us. I'm really excited. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Will, we'll start with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Will Yoder. I work on the Instagram Sports Partnerships team. We focus on basically serving as consultants to the sports world to make sure everybody understands how to get the most out of using all of our tools on Instagram, whether they're athletes, leagues, teams, or media entities. I've been here about 5 years, been able to work on some really cool things like the launch of Stories, IGTV, and now Reels. And yeah, excited to talk about athletes and social today.
Excellent, thank you. Caroline.
Hey everyone, I'm Caroline. I lead our athlete partnerships team at YouTube. I've been at YouTube now for a little over 4 years and have basically built out our athletes business on the platform. So very excited as well to be here and talk with you all. And thank you, Nate, Bleacher Report, and Clio for having me.
Great. Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. Thank you to the Clios. I'm Doug Bernstein. I'm currently the general manager of House of Highlights. I've been with Bleacher Report for 10 years, oversaw the social for BR for about 3 or 4 of those, and then moved over to overseeing House of Highlights, which I've done for the past 3 years. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, so we have some trailblazers and thought leaders in this space, so let's get into it. Okay, so just to set up this trend a little bit, I wanted to highlight 2 examples that to me kind of encapsulate kind of what we're talking about here. So one is a really striking piece of data from Instagram. Will shared this with me before, but basically, so there's 400 million sports accounts, sports fans on Instagram. On average, they follow about 10 accounts. And from that, you can imagine, it's a mix of leagues and teams and Sports Center and all these different accounts that are on Instagram. And you would probably imagine, or in years past, you could imagine a broad sampling of athletes kind of within those categories. But this year, the data shows that 8 out of 10 of those accounts that the sports fans follow are athletes. So that really shows that sports has become personal and personalities are driving, and the athletes themselves are really at the center of it. The second is more anecdotal, observational. So, of the teams that came back, of the leagues that came back this summer, I think most people would say that the NBA was among the most successful in kind of recapturing culture and the sports world. I mean, the NHL, the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup the other day, and I don't think it even made the headlines on ESPN. So, but the NBA was different, and of the things that people were talking about following the NBA, especially early on when the games were just kind of picking up, it wasn't highlights, it wasn't hot takes from Stephen A. It was the players themselves. So, Matisse for the 76ers, JaVale on the Lakers, these players vlogging their way through the bubble, and all the clips that were picked up of Big Face Coffee and Jimmy Butler on Instagram, and obviously all the amazing content we share about House of Highlights. And you could see how modern sports is really distilled through the athlete's perspective, and nowhere was that more clear than in the bubble. So just to kind of set up kind of where we're headed today, I want to talk about where this came from, how it's impacting the sports landscape right now, and where we're headed. So first question for the panelists. So I want to hear a little more about how this trend has played out on your platform. So did you predict that in 2020 athletes would begin to have the power that we're seeing them have, and what aspects of this trend has surprised you? So Will, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So prior to coming to Instagram, I actually worked at Octagon as the head of digital for the athlete representation business they had. And I worked with athletes really closely on their social media. And they would always give me the logins for all of their accounts to kind of help them with whatever they needed to do. But they would not give me access to their Instagram because it was so personal to them and so important to them. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to come to this company, because I knew it was a place where there was a lot of authentic athlete content. They're actually on that account. They're talking to their fans. They're talking to their colleagues, the fellow athletes on Instagram. So there's a great social thread that exists on Instagram, which I think makes it really special. I think we've also really focused on tools that specifically are helpful for athletes, right? Tools like Stories and Instagram Live, they're ephemeral and they're very lightweight. They're very easy to use. The same way that the five of us on this panel would use those tools, the same way athletes use them to reach millions of fans. So it really plays to their strong suits of just being casual and being themselves and sharing their everyday moments. But it has definitely taken off like crazy this year. With COVID, people were forced into their homes, and athletes had to figure out how to use just their phones to reach their fans. And Instagram was a natural place, especially Instagram Live. One of the craziest stats that we saw during that time period was during the first month of the shutdown, we saw athlete live viewership go up 600% on Instagram during that 1 month period, which is pretty incredible. But yeah, we've always felt that athletes feel at home on Instagram, but it has definitely gone supercharged this year for sure.
And Caroline, what aspects of this have been surprising to you, or that you kind of saw coming? How is it playing out on YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, YouTube has really been building out. I mean, if we're taking sort of the 10,000 foot view, like YouTube has really been building out a sports destination for a long time. I mean, we've been working with leagues and teams and broadcasters to really make YouTube become this sort of home of highlights. So we've really built this sort of destination where fans come to YouTube to watch and consume sports content. And so it's really sort of only a natural transition in the sense that now athletes are sort of taking advantage of that audience. And so it's really interesting to see the, rate at which athletes are starting YouTube channels to not only sort of engage with that existing audience, but also sort of create and drive a new audience for fans that may not know them and are now discovering them through YouTube.
That's excellent. And Doug, House of Highlights is obviously, you saw this trend coming miles away, and your success in large part has been as a result of the athletes becoming more, in front of their fans and sharing more of their lives. So what have you seen in 2020 from the House of Highlights perspective about the power of athletes?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One is, this transition is definitely something that we've seen coming for some time. And the way we look at it is there were traditional papers that kind of shifted to digital publishers that kind of moved to personalities. The reason why Bleacher Report purchased House of Highlights was because House of Highlights sat more in the middle of between a publisher and a personality. And, people knew the voice behind the account. And that was a big part of, why Bleacher Report looked to invest in House of Highlights, was this kind of overarching shift in consumption towards personalities. And athletes has played a really, really critical part in that as well, and has played a really critical part in the foundation of House of Highlights' success. So when you think about the first big video that really went viral on House of Highlights, it wasn't actually an NBA clip. It wasn't something from the leagues. It wasn't, something from a kid in the backyard, which is, House of Highlights has done really well. It was actually Kyrie in his house dunking on a in-home hoop in his living room. That was the first clip that really blew up on House of Highlights and really helped establish the account. So for House of Highlights, we've really tried to establish ourselves in two ways. One is being really celebratory of athletes, and also being really relatable and helping athletes tell their stories. So you've seen, that trajectory, play out more and more as Will and Caroline alluded to. More and more athletes are taking to Instagram, taking to YouTube, taking to TikTok and Twitter and other platforms, and getting their content out there. And that has served House of Highlights really well. We've been able to utilize that content to put forth, to kind of populate our pages, to not be as reliant on kind of the traditional means of posts that we would have had in years past. And that's really been something that's been encouraging. I think we've done that alongside the athletes. We kind of developed really, really good relationships with athletes. So being able to not just kind of take their content, but really amplify their message in their own voice, I think has been something really critical.
So, Will, when you look back at 2020, what is one of the most salient examples of an individual athlete or a moment in sports culture that kind of exemplifies this trend on Instagram or elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say two come to mind. I think very early in the shutdown, Instagram Live, as I mentioned, just blew up, and superstars decided to host their own live shows on IG Live because it was so lightweight and so easy. So Steph Curry did a couple of lives where he was basically doing a game show, pulling in different NBA stars and asking them silly questions to go find things in their house. Just had fun with it. Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade did wine tasting together on IG Live, which is just like really fun and personal. You could imagine as a fan just being brought into their homes and having this experience and maybe having your own glass of wine with them. The other obviously important piece is, the discussion around racial justice that has been incredibly important, especially in sports, and how athletes have taken to Instagram to really have their voices be heard. I think one of the ones who has done the best is Lewis Hamilton. He's really just been out there telling his story, having his POV heard, especially in a sport where, he's one of the few people speaking out on that issue. So I think those are the two that definitely kind of highlighted on Instagram, at least for this year.
Nice. And Caroline, what about on YouTube?
I think you sort of stole my thunder in the beginning, Nate, in the sense that I would really say that the content coming out of the NBA and WNBA bubbles was really, really, I think probably best exemplified this trend in 2020. In the sense that, again, you sort of illustrated JaVale McGee and Matisse Thybulle. And then I'd also love to highlight sort of Isabel Harrison. I think that the three of them really took advantage of this opportunity where they were able to own that narrative and own that moment and really connect with fans in a different and unique way. I think they were able to provide really unique insight, show off their personality, and kind of own that voice. And it's just incredible to see just how that has taken off. JaVale, I think, was at sort of like 40,000 subscribers, and then through his vlogs is now well over 600K. He actually just posted even, a couple hours ago, and they're, gearing up to be in the NBA finals. And Matisse as well, I think his is really interesting, not only for, he's a 76ers rookie that no one really knew, and now through his YouTube channel has become sort of more of a household name. But it's also, gained recognition from some of our sort of YouTube OGs, in a sense that Casey Neistat loves his editing and wants to collab with him. So I think it's been really incredible to see these athletes take advantage of this moment, think about YouTube as the platform that they can sort of tell these longer stories. And the content did extremely well. I mean, just from their content alone, it was, drove over 30 million views. So I think it just shows that, there's a ripe audience, a unique moment, and they really took advantage of it.
Yeah, that's great. I saw on Twitter, Casey Neistat tweeted, Matisse is now like mostly a creator and secondarily a basketball player,
Yeah.
which I don't know how folks would feel about that, but I think it's great.
And Matisse now, I think, which is amazing, seeing the value, is he's now doing the off season. So because his,
Right.
Bubble content did so well, he's now using his platform to really create content in the off season and really trying to connect with fans globally.
Nice. And Doug, I promise to stop putting you last, but yeah, let's hear it.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think, it's for us, three really interesting categories. So I think the first was when, the pandemic first happened and everybody was stuck in their house. I think a lot of the content that the athletes were putting forth was really interesting. And there was this really cool feedback loop. So for example, on House of Highlights, we featured a video of a kid in his house throwing water bottles into garbage cans. And he kind of did like a little 3-point loop around his house. We were then able to kind of reach out to Trae Young, who we have a good relationship. He immediately was able to film something on his end and, filmed it and then kind of do his version, posted to his account, to House of Highlights. Same with Dwayne Wade. And it was kind of this really cool way for like the athletes and the individual people in their house to come together and create something that was entertaining. We actually saw like our performance go up significantly during the early days of the pandemic. Largely because of the creativity both from the athletes and the individuals in their house, and how all those things kind of came together in a really, really unique way. So I think that's the first kind of example of something that I thought was particularly interesting. I think the second is what Will noted too, the athletes being able to be outspoken as relates to racial and social justice issues without having a filter. I think if you look at what Jaylen Brown in particular did, kind of really being a leader, not just as it relates to athletes, but as it relates to everybody on those issues, and being able to have Instagram as a platform to be able to express his feelings and be on the front lines, and for people to be able to just kind of have a window into that is really, really, truly amazing. And I think the third is just what you continue to see every day is kind of this feedback loop between the athletes, the publishing platforms, and the comment section, right? So much of the focus is often on the videos and the individual posts or the stories. But then there's this whole other ecosystem that happens in the comments that's really, really unique. So when something happens in a game, and it's featured on House of Highlights or Bleacher Report, you see athletes comment on it. And it really is this really cool lens into how athletes think about their highlights, how they engage with one another. A really cool example recently was Tyler Hero. After the Heat made the finals, Bleacher Report posted this really funny meme. Tyler Hero was like, "You got to get that one at me." Bleacher Report sent it to him, and then he posted it on his page. And it is just this really cool, experience to feel like you're in that inner circle with the athlete. They have their own control of the narrative. They're able to interact with publishers and their fans. And that's just something that has never really existed. When you think about SportsCenter being such a passive experience with linear TV, that's how I grew up. And now, as a fan, you're able to not only watch the highlight, see how the player's commenting on it, and then see how he's engaging with his teammates on it. That's really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, and just to finish off the story about Trae Young shooting water bottles into waste paper baskets, our production company at Port LA actually saw that trend happening, and we built this format called Ultimate Home Championship, kind of around athletes, messing around in their living rooms and getting competitive with one another, and ended up working with YouTube on it as a show. So it's definitely like bubbles up within culture and then finds other manifestations. It's cool. So moving on, I wanted just a question for Caroline. Athletes gaining more influence and power, we're seeing it all over social media, but a lot of people don't really understand kind of what impacts that's having sort of behind the scenes on whether it's the business of sports or the way the platforms are looking at athletes. What are some impacts, kind of like downstream impacts that the average fan might not be aware of how athletes are kind of reshaping sports at a broader level?
Yeah, no, I think, as a lot of folks have said to date, I think it's incredibly powerful how athletes are using their platform to really connect with new audiences. And I think so often, right, like the average sports fan really just sees athletes as like, what are their stats? How did they do on the court or their field? But I think through using YouTube and other social platforms, these athletes can now sort of showcase the sort of different multifaceted aspects to their personality. And really through sort of the longer form storytelling of YouTube, I think they're able to sort of do that in a way that often sort of a tweet or a photo can't really sort of showcase that depth. I think probably one of the best examples of athletes doing this is Cam Newton. Love him or hate him, he can definitely be a little bit of a polarizing figure on the field, but I think through his YouTube channel, he's really shown this other side of him that I think many fans don't get to see. So for example, last season with Carolina, he had a really terrible foot injury and he was sidelined for the rest of the year, put on the injured reserve list. And in a very typical Cam fashion, instead of sort of just posting a photo or doing something that's, I'm out, he instead created a YouTube video where he spoke, from the heart about what happened, how he was feeling. And I think, he sort of started the video lighting a cigar, pouring a glass of wine, and kind of talking openly, talking from the heart. And I think that was really powerful. So then if you looked in all, the comment section, that fans were actually saying like, get well, Cam, we can't wait for you to be back on the field. Like, we're really proud of you. It wasn't sort of the usual trolls that are like, you're over the hill and you're never going to come back. And I think because he was so authentic and so honest and really was like, look, this is the real me, that it really resonated well. And I think that is sort of a perfect example about how, athletes are able to use these platforms to sort of show off more than who they are just on the field.
Yeah. Hard cut to Bill Belichick at home being like,
Exactly.
Nice. So Will, tell me a little bit about how the leagues play into this, because you work with both leagues and players, and leagues often find themselves kind of caught in the middle of social media storms, like on the negative side, which we don't have to go into, but like the Antonio Brown situation and how that was so public on social media and how the league kind of had to like respond in real time. And then there are obviously like many positive examples of how the players are kind of uplifting the leagues. But how have you witnessed the leagues respond to this new era of athlete power and influence? And
Yeah, I mean, the NBA was definitely first movers in this space really just saying, look, we want our athletes to get as much content as possible on their social channels, because the brighter they shine, the brighter the league shines. And as a result, you can see NBA athletes specifically are by far the most followed US athletes, bar none. Many of them are actually larger on Instagram than competing leagues are on Instagram. And LeBron has a larger following on Instagram than the NBA does, which is pretty incredible. The NBA, I believe, is the most followed league on Instagram right now. And I think since then, you've seen all the other leagues say, hey, like, the NBA is growing because their athletes are growing, and their athletes are growing in many ways because of their social media presence. So now you see all the leagues that we work with have player social teams built in, designed to make sure these athletes have the resources to know how to be successful on the platform, and even shooters on the ground creating content bespoke to them so they can have it on their social channels. I mean, I think back to when I was at Octagon, and we considered it a huge win if the Warriors would send us a highlight clip that we could post on Steph Curry's Facebook page, where now there are literally people on sidelines taking shots with phones or cameras that are like very different than broadcast angles, that they're literally feeding to athletes via platforms like Socially and Open Doors, so they can post it directly on their own channels. So I think that's a huge win that all these leagues are investing in this. And I think if you look on more globally at the global landscape, global football clubs have been doing this for a while as well. And that's why many global footballers are the most followed people on the platform. A lot of people don't realize Cristiano Ronaldo is the most followed person, period, on Instagram by a large amount. And the only 3 athletes with over 100 million followers on Instagram are global footballers. So I think the clubs globally have done an amazing job of helping build their athletes' brand as well.
That's great. Doug, question for you. So, and this is one you'll probably be able to sink your teeth into, because it's about the kind of old guard of sports publishers and sports media. You know, the image of on SportsCenter that always made me laugh was of a you know, the host with like a tweet on a big screen behind them, you know, with like the athlete saying whatever of the day. And it was just so clear that they were trying to make this new medium kind of work for their entrenched, the way they've presented sports news for so long. And it was an awkward mismatch. So in what you've seen, how have kind of the sports media landscape and sports media publishers evolved, adapted, reacted to the era of athletes being kind of in control, and who have been some of the winners and losers in that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question. So I think, you know, in terms of how sports media companies have evolved, one, I think, you know, they've had to become more native on the platforms themselves, right? If you're going to create on YouTube, or if you're going to create on, you know, Instagram or TikTok, or you know, for these platforms, you really have to create content that doesn't feel like a TV show repurposed for these social platforms. Each one has its own identity. Each one has its own content that resonates specifically for that. So I think that the publishers and the digital media and the media companies that have successfully adapted to that reality, I think they have done well. I think in terms of the athletes themselves and how people need to account for, media companies need to account for that change, is I think about ourselves on House of Highlights. Our most successful show is a YouTube series that we have that's called The Reel, where we have NBA players react to their own highlights. And normally that would be something, you know, that you just have broadcast announcers doing and just saying like, hey, here's a highlight, we're going to react to it, right? But what we've really seen our audience gravitate towards is the individual athletes themselves, and put them in a position where they can react. They are natural. They're not, you know, in a suit or tie. It's not like a moment out of the game. We're trying to get them in their house or get them in a comfortable environment, and really just make it a fun, collaborative experience where it's like, hey, we have some fun highlights we want to show you. What did it feel like when you dunked on, you know, LeBron or whoever? Not that many people get a chance to dunk on LeBron, but, you know, we were able to sit down with Dame Lillard and, you know, talk to him about what that moment felt like when he hit the three, and just do it from his house. We were able to do an interview with Boogie Cousins where we talked about that moment where him and Joel Embiid are like slapping each other on the behind, and just to see him laugh and enjoy watching that. You know, that's something that normally, you know, wouldn't happen, because I think there's a lot of constraints with, you know, athletes and being put in front of, you know, what they can say, what they can't say, and how you construct that content creation. So I think the companies that have really allowed athletes to speak authentically, to be their true selves, I think those are the ones that have had success. I think, you know, you look at a Bleacher Report, you look at a House of Highlights, I think we've done pretty well as it relates to that. I think if you look at, some of our competitors as well, I think there's a lot of people that have done good work. I think Overtime's done a really nice job with younger athletes, allowing them a platform. I think the Players Tribune, has had really a good run, allowing individual athletes to kind of be able to get what they want out there via, written text. So I think there's been and I should say video content as well. But I think, there's been a lot of good examples of platforms that have done that. But I think, as much as anybody, this conversation has really been focused on traditional athletes. When you really think about, a whole new generation of athletes, esports and things of that nature, that's when the door opens up. So I think for me, the media company that maybe has done it best is FaZe. I'm really, really envious of what they've accomplished, how they've looked to rethink, what a sports media company is. And I think they've just kind of pivoted the framework, and I really look up to and admire what they've done.
Completely. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about the business of sports and some of the brand deals that underlie a lot of this content. So for Will or Caroline, how have you seen traditional endorsement relationships between brands and athletes be reshaped in this new model where athletes are constantly putting out stuff? They have a slate of projects. They're like entertainment platforms in their own way. And how has that changed the way they work with brands?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see it evolve, especially since when I was on the other side of the house, actually working with these deals on the athlete representation side. And it would always pain me that at that time, social was just a throw-in to finalize a deal, right? It was, okay, let's get this across the finish line. Here's 10 tweets, 2 Instagram posts, done. And not a lot of thought went into what that content would be. And a lot of time it just was taking advertorial that existed for some print campaign and putting it on social. And that's not really leveraging any power of social media whatsoever. So it's been really amazing to see how, especially with this year and the lack of physical availability of these athletes, but even just the last few years in general, brands have realized, oh, if we want to actually engage with this audience that we're paying to be a part of, let's create content that will do well on those platforms and make sense on those platforms and feel authentic on those platforms. Nate, I know I talked to you about this, but the Steph Curry Britta song is still stuck in my head, right? And that was who knows how many years ago. But that's like a perfect example of like the type of content that natively lived in that platform perfectly. Another thing on our end that's really interesting is the rise of Instagram shopping, which is which is incredibly popular right now. But we have a tool that's rolled out in the last year or so called Shopping from Creators, which actually allows athletes to tag products on behalf of their brand partners. So you can imagine someone like Donovan Mitchell, instead of posting, a photo of a shoe and saying, hey, go to Adidas website or a store near you and check out this shoe, and feeling very advertised and directed, just having a really cool photo of you wearing your new sneakers and a caption talking about how much that signature sneaker means to you. It's your first signature sneaker, right? Talking about what it means and what your input was on the design. And then there's the ability to tap that photo, learn more, and buy directly on Instagram. So I really think Instagram shopping is going to represent a huge new wave of what we previously thought of branded content, but really just sponsorship activation, especially for consumer product goods on our platform moving forward.
Yeah, and just to kind of chime in on that, I think Will hit the nail on the head in terms of sort of this evolution of branded content. It used to be exactly as he said. It was a brand saying, here's a 30-second, just repost it, like call it a day. And I think what's really interesting is to see how athletes are now partnering with brands and sort of have their own voice in the sense that they now are bringing something to the table about how they want their individual brand represented in partnership with that brand. And I think the first thing I always say as it pertains to YouTube is, build that audience first before you start sort of extracting value from it. Like, I think it's very important for an athlete, if they're launching a YouTube channel, not to just say, here's branded content piece number 1, number 2, number 3, because you're not going to see that viewership and not going to see that engagement. It's really important for them to sort of build that audience first, really sort of connect with their audience, and then start saying, okay, what is now the content that, works, and sort of how can I now layer brand into that? And I think someone doing this really well is Daniel Ricciardo as well. I think, speaking again to kind of global athletes, he is basically doing a behind the scenes series during this, crazy Formula One season. And instead of, saying, all right, like, I'm now going to just create this content on its own, he's worked with his new brand partner, Thorne, to have them come in and sponsor this series. And the reason it's doing so well and driving, thousands and thousands of views is because it's good content first. and there's an authentic brand integration. And that's what sort of allowed this great win-win between Daniel and Thorne. And I think that's sort of really important as these athletes sort of take these brand partnerships forward and use their platform to really create authentic content.
Yeah, and I think about that for House of Highlights as well. You know, when you look at 2019, there's a website called Brandtail that tracks the top 100 or the top, best performing branded content on social media platforms. And House of Highlights was actually responsible for 51 of the top 100 best performing branded videos on all of Instagram. Thank you, Will, for having your platform. It's great. Carolyn as well. We definitely do very well on YouTube as well. So thank you guys for the platforms. But, I think if you look at, the success that we have in the videos, and that was not just sports, that was across all branded videos on Instagram. A lot of the success of successful content, the most successful branded content that we did was in partnership with athletes. So we did something with Gatorade with Christian Pulisic, where we created this kind of viral UGC moment that looks like it's just kind of nothing happening, and Christian Pulisic walks up to a couple of fans and he nutmegs them, right? And that video I think has like 3.5 million or 4 million views. It's one of the most successful branded pieces ever on Instagram. And it really naturally put the athlete front and center. It wasn't forced. It was very organic to both House of Highlights and Instagram platform and to Christian himself. And it was a way for Gatorade to get their message out kind of seamlessly. And to be able to get it out on the platform that really resonates with their target audience. So when a brand and a publisher and the athlete, can all kind of come together, it's a really, really exciting thing. I think the social platforms really allow that to take effect in a really unique way that's just much more engaging.
Okay, so I want to respond to some of the critics of this trend for a second. And Doug, I'll put it back to you. So you're at the Thanksgiving table, and your uncle, he's a couple glass of whiskey in, and he starts laying into you about House of Highlights and how it's taking us too far away from the games themselves. What's happening in the bubble? What are we watching in the bubble? We're watching, the Mavs play pickleball on their day off. Like, this is silly stuff that has nothing to do with the games themselves, and it's not sustainable. It's a sideshow. And maybe it's fun for right now, but we're kind of losing what makes sports epic and official and big. So how do you respond to people like that that's saying this era of athlete power and this type of content is kind of fleeting?
Man, I feel like you were really at my Thanksgiving. I don't know how you knew that. Man, you even knew the uncle and everything. So a couple of things. Like, this is a critique that we see quite a bit, stick to highlights and things of that nature. But the reality of it is, the target audience for House of Highlights in particular is younger, right? It's 13 to 24. And the content that they gravitate towards is not only always the straight highlight. And for House of Highlights, what we've really tried to do is provide a narrative, right? It's not just like all of a sudden dropping you into this one game or this one moment. It's really about building the story arcs behind the players and really allowing people to be invested. I think a lot of reasons why you're seeing, the Heat or MLB struggle is because a lot of the people don't know the personalities behind it, right? Mike Trout is one of the most amazing baseball players of all time, but people don't really know who Mike Trout is. You don't get to see much of Mike Trout's personality. So then when the World Series is happening and the MLB is happening right now, honestly, most people don't even know whether or not he's in it, and I think what you want to be able to do is really provide a sense of depth about who these people are. And that really provides a rooting interest, and it really helps appeal to a younger audience, especially a Gen Z audience that drifts more towards personalities, that's watching less of the live sports. I think if anything, we're really, really enhancing that. So when we're able to show a different side of Tyler Hero, we're able to show a different side of LeBron, that goes out to 20 million House of Highlights followers, that reaches, a different set of audience and gets them more engaged. So yes, it's not always the traditional highlight that you may see, but it is putting the athletes themselves front and center and helping them appeal to a younger audience, making them more relevant and just always front of mind. Without that, if it's just the straight highlights, it becomes less interesting and you start to lose that audience. And I think it may not feel as epic or as traditional, but I think for a younger audience, this is how they consume content. And you have to, make sure that you're staying resonant with them.
It's great. Yeah. Your uncle's not convinced, but I was convinced by that. Yeah. Okay, so rounding it out, I wanted to look ahead to kind of beyond 2020. Obviously there's been such a spike of athlete-driven content, athlete-driven series this year as people have been at home and without a lot to do. But wanted to kind of look into the future, 2021 and beyond. Is this trend something that's going to endure in its current form, or do you think it's a blip on the radar, or more of like an acceleration of a broader pattern? So, Caroline, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think this is definitely an acceleration of a longer term trend. And I think exactly sort of as you were talking about in that last question as well, I think that we kind of live in this world now where, I don't think we can ever really expect athletes to sort of shut up and dribble. I think that they've really found a very powerful voice. And they're sort of, if we look at it from like the social justice standpoint, I think they're using it for good and really driving change. But I also think that they're actually doing a lot to kind of, bring about and increase awareness of the sports that they play. I think, for example, on YouTube, if I, might be a big fan of a certain creator, I might watch a collab that he or she did with Ryan Garcia. I'm like, this guy's really interesting. I'm now sort of subscribing to his channel. And now I realize he has a big upcoming fight. And now I'm sort of buying the pay-per-view to watch his fight. I think this sort of acceleration of athletes finding their voice, connecting with fans, being authentic, not only sort of helps drive tune-in awareness of their sport that they play, but I also think it sort of helps empower them be more than just an athlete. And especially as, social creation tools change, as phones get better and better and you can sort of shoot from your camera, I think that helps. And now you also have this sort of next generation of athletes that really sort of grew up on YouTube in a way that I think, our A-list athletes right now sort of didn't necessarily, just given sort of the timing. And I think as they really sort of see the inherent value of the platform, they're now sort of transitioning from, viewers to creators in their own right. And I think that this trend is only going to continue next year and beyond, regardless of sort of what ends up playing out with COVID and how these leagues change. I think athletes are just going to continue to create really great content, and they don't necessarily have to go through other platforms anymore. They can go direct to fan through YouTube and other platforms.
That's great. Will?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think what we're seeing here is an increase in interest in athlete content, but I don't think we're necessarily seeing it as with the loss of or a decrease in interest in other content, right? I don't think they are rising because leagues, media, and teams are following. I think what we're seeing is that social media distribution is replacing traditional media distribution, right? So if you look at how you would previously decide what team and what athlete you would root for, it would be, oh, I grew up in Washington, D.C., I get the Washington Post, I watch the Washington sports channels, therefore, unfortunately, I'm a Washington Wizards fan, right? That was the traditional way to do it. But now you have a whole lot of other reasons to choose who you might want to be a fan of. Maybe I am going to be a Golden State Warriors fan because I love what Steph Curry is putting on his social, and I'm more attracted to that than this traditional media distribution I used to have. So I think with that, you're going to see all boats rise, because whether it's an athlete who is more attractive to a specific fan, regardless of geography, the same can be true with a team, right? Maybe it's the Toronto Raptors are particularly popular in the UK, which I have an experience of watching the finals last year in the UK, and they were incredibly popular there. So I think we're going to see all boats continue to rise, but I think athletes are definitely going to get a bigger and bigger part of that pie, because traditionally they haven't had their own distribution to own on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the genie's out of the bottle and it's not going back. I think it's only going to accelerate. I think Will's point is a really good one about, the athletes essentially driving the interest in the teams and the teams driving the interest in the leagues, right? That's definitely a trend that I think is here and it's going to accelerate. And I think the athlete creator, like that merger, I think is really going to be heightened over the course of the next decade. I think if you look at, a soccer player like Serge Aguero, there are definitely people on Twitch that probably don't even know Serge Aguero from his soccer success. They just know him as, kind of this Twitch personality. And I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see, whether it's Ben Simmons joining FaZe or Bronny joining FaZe, you're going to see kind of this new world open up where athletes are not only going to be attached to traditional teams, but maybe things like creator teams. And the creator and athlete will kind of merge in a really interesting way that will probably redefine fandom over the course of the next 10 to 20 years.
All right. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. And thank you, Caroline, Doug, and Will for for joining us. And again, to the Clios and Bleacher Report for supporting us with the production. Yeah, very excited to see how this trend continues to play out. I know as Port LA, we're going to be following very closely and continuing to try to make content that attracts viewers. So yeah, I know you guys are doing the same. Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
Nate.
everyone.
Thanks, BR.
Bye, guys. Thank you.